Hi Year 7s, I'm going to be demonstrating the second recipe in your booklet, which is scones or scones. You can say either or neither or neither. It just usually depends on what you've been brought up to say. If you've got parents that call them scones, then you're going to call them scones probably, but neither of them are wrong. And you can change the flavour in them as well as the pronunciation. You could make fruit scones, which I've got here, or some with dried fruit in them, and put a bit of icing sugar on top of them. Or you could make some cheese scones, or you could just make some plain scones, which would just have sugar in them. So you've got the basic recipe, and then you're just going to add different things to it. So I just advise you to have some digital scales for this, because trying to sort of guess it out, I mean, you can guess it, 225 grams from a bag of flour, but with digital scales, which you can get quite cheaply now online, or lots of supermarkets will sell them, because some of the cook sections still open in big supermarkets. You can get a set of these, because we're going to be doing lots of recipes that require weighing, so it'd be a good idea to get some of those. And you just get accuracy then. I mean, I've been cooking for years and I still use digital scales. Some things like butter we can guess, and I'll show you a quick way you can work out the butter if it's just something like 50 grams or 100 grams. But for flour and for sugar and for fruit, I would say it's a really good idea to get some. And you can do millilitres on here as well. So the first thing we need is some flour. Now for this recipe, you're going to need some self-raising flour. You might have some plain flour in your cupboard, but this is the one you need, which is in all supermarkets, self-raising flour. And this is the one we use for cakes and for scones or scones, because it helps them to rise. This is basically plain flour that has got some baking powder added to it, which is why it's called self-raising, because it's going to rise up in the oven because of this baking powder, and I'll tell you how that happens in a minute. So if all you've got is plain flour, you will need to add some extra baking powder to this. We are going to put some baking powder with it, even though it's self-raising, to give it a little bit of extra help. Because this scone mixture is quite a heavy mixture, much different to a sponge cake mixture. It needs a bit of extra help with some baking powder to help it rise up in the oven, to lift that heavy dough up in here. So you need 25 grams of this. Now I'm using my digital scales, so you put a bowl on there, switch it on, but you need to make sure you zero it, because otherwise it will weigh the bowl or whatever you're using. And obviously it wouldn't just pour flour straight onto that, it would make a mess. So just zero it, and then using a spoon, if you tip it out, you've got sort of less control, haven't you, to 200, until it reads 225 grams. So you can always take some out if you go over. Try and avoid putting your fingers in the bag, because you're going to add, if you've got any bacteria on your hands. Well, first I mentioned I did wash my hands before I touched anything. Before you start cooking, I should have said that, shouldn't I? To wash your hands, on the backs of the hands, in between your fingers, on your wrists as well, and then dry them really well. Make sure your worktop's nice and clean, your equipment's clean. So I've got 225 grams in there, so I'm going to put that in my bowl. I'm going to move that out of the way, and the scales, I don't need them for a little bit, because the butter you can guess. Now I'm using butter, which is going to give you a better flavour. You can use margarine, and you can get block margarine as well, or if you're vegan you might want to use a vegetable fat. That's absolutely fine. You could use oat milk or soya milk for the liquid. This is going to give a better flavour though, a little bit more expensive, but if you're making cakes, I think it gives you a better flavour. So if you want to, because we only need 50 grams, you could actually work this out, because if you divide it into 5, each one of those will be 50 grams. So I've already taken 50 grams off here for the ones I made earlier. So now it's into, I've got 4/5 left. So I just want to take another one of that 5th out of there. So that doesn't require scales, and you can judge it in that way really. It might not be exactly when you go onto scales, but that'll be absolutely fine for this. So just coat it in the flour a little bit so it's nicely covered. And I'm going to cut it up into little pieces. You could use a palette knife for this, or you could use a table knife, which I'm using, which is not sharp, so it doesn't matter if you cut it towards you. And I'm just cutting it into little pieces. And you could, because we're going to do the rubbing in method, and the reason we're cutting it into pieces is to give it a bit of a head start. Because if you just get a big lump of butter and you just squash it, it's going to start melting very quickly because your hands are warm. So what you want to do is hands on the side of the bowl and lifting it up, and you're squashing it. I'll have a little bit closer, as you can see. You're squashing it between your fingers and your thumb, like that, passing it through, just using your fingertips like that. It's that sort of motion, okay? But lifting it up each time. Don't keep it in your hands. Drop it and get some more. Squash, drop, and then get some more. And as you're bringing up, you're also keeping the mixture nice and cool, because you're getting the cool air passing through the flour. You're also keeping it, if you're using your fingertips, you're not melting the butter too much. If you do that with your hands, the butter's going to melt and it'll all come to clump together and into a dough too early. We don't want it to be too early. We want to do this so it looks like breadcrumbs. So you keep on going, this pressing motion, but only your fingertips should get dirty because they're the coolest part of your hand. If you start using the hands, I said it will come in together in the pastry. And if it's clumping together, you're not going to need, it won't take the liquid that you need because you've already melted the butter. So what's happening in here? Every grain of flour in here is being coated in butter. It's been waterproof coated. It's like giving it a little jacket to waterproof it, because we know if something oily, the water will run off it and fatty. And then what happens when you add a liquid to it, this is what gives the scones its lovely melt in the mouth texture, because the liquid, the butter gives it texture base, a really light crumbly texture, because it coats those starch grains. And you keep on going. It's started to break down into tiny little pieces. Now you could do this in a food processor as well if you've got one, but I would take it out before you add the liquid in the food processor, because it can go a bit tough in the processor if you add the liquid in the processor. So you keep on going. You can see this mixture now looking like breadcrumbs. And if you want to see if it's done, if you do that with a bowl, shake the bowl from back to front, the big lumps will come to the top, and I've got a few big lumps of butter. If you don't get the big lumps out, when they get in the oven, that fat will melt and it will create a hole in your scone, and that will affect the appearance of them. So just keep on getting those big lumps out, and it should all be, the mixture should still be cool, it shouldn't be sticking together, it should look like that, like breadcrumbs, which means they're all the same size basically. You don't need to wash your hands, just rub them over the bowl. Now remember, I'm reading it, I forgot to add the extra bit of baking powder I told you about, and it's just half a teaspoon. So I've got some teaspoon measures, but you need to make sure that you flatten it out like that and then put it in. If you haven't got, obviously you could use normal teaspoon, but again, just be careful with that, because teaspoons are all different sizes. You really do need to make sure, and it's only half a teaspoon, isn't it? So you need to make sure it's half of a level teaspoon, okay? Not too much in there, because I say you get this awful aftertaste. So that could go in with your flour. I'm just putting it now because I forgot it. Got to remember it at the last minute. And just mix those ingredients around. So I say mine's going to be sweet ones with some fruit in there. So I'm going to get my digital scales back again. And I'm going to get something to weigh the sugar and the fruit in again. So again, switch on and 0. Again, avoid putting your hands in bags because I've got butter on my hands. So I just need 100 grams. I'm going to tip those out. Hold it big, so 100 grams. Okay. There we go, got 100 grams. Okay. And they go in the mixture as well. Now, if you were doing cheese ones, you would add, rather than the fruit and sugar, you'd add the grated cheese. Now, try and get some strong flavoured cheese like cheddar or parmesan or Gruyere, and you put that cheese in. Also, traditionally, some cayenne pepper goes into cheese scones if you want to put them in. Gives it a little bit of a kick, not too much. Or you could add herbs into it. You can basically put whatever flavours in you like, but you need to add the flavours in before you add the liquid, because you need it all to come together. It's very difficult to add the extra bits, your flavours, your fruit and your cheese once you've got it into a dough. So before you add the liquid, add your extra bits in there. And I say I'm going to add some sugar in there. And I'm using caster sugar for this, 50 grams of caster sugar, which is quite a lot. And this is going to make, depends on about 6 to 7 scones, 50 grams. There we go. Put that in as well. Mix them around, make some space. Out of the way. And so I'm using a palette knife now. If you didn't have a palette knife, you could just use a table knife rather than your hands, because you want to keep this mixture as cool as possible. We don't want to melt that butter too much, because it will affect the texture of the scones, and it'll affect the amount of liquid you need to get in if it melts too much. So just mix it, and now I need to add the liquid. Now, some recipes that add eggs into the scones. This one is just milk though, so you need to get a measuring jug and find out where it says millilitres. Then this is on here, and it is 125 millilitres. So when you've got that, just put it down to see if it's accurate. A little bit too much in there, so I'm going to put a little bit back. 125. And now don't just tip it in, we're going to add it slowly, alright? There we go, and stir that around with your palette knife. If you do your hands now, and not only will it start to melt the butter in because your hands are hot, but also going to get very mucky. So keep your hands clean for this, because because they will get very sticky if you put them in now. A little bit more, and you'll see it's starting to clump together into pieces, but it's not in a dough yet. You're going to keep on going until it's coming together in a dough. You add it slowly, because you might not need all the milk, you might add a tiny bit more, but we do it slowly because it's very difficult to get it out once it's in there. So just take your time on that. Keep moving around. So what I've done now with this liquid, I've activated the raising agent. Once you mix this with a liquid, you can do sort of science experiments with this as well. It gives off a gas called carbon dioxide. And that gas, when it gets in the oven, these scones, that's what makes them rise. The carbon dioxide pushes the scone up. As well as the air, you put a little bit of air in there when you rubbed in. That also obviously rises in the oven, and because of that, but with different recipes like pastry, which we don't want to rise, doesn't have any raising agent in there. Bread, which we also want to rise in the oven, that uses a different raising agent, and a tiny bit more milk in there. That uses yeast to help it to rise, which is called a biological raising agent, and this one is a chemical raising agent. There we go, move it around. I'm going to get my palette knife out now, and I'm going to put my hand in there now because it's clumped together, it's not dry. Then you put your hand in, just bring it together. Be gentle with this dough. It said knead gently in the recipe, and it really is gently, not vigorously kneading that you might do with bread. Okay, so now I need to put a little bit of flour down. Now with flour, try not to, you might have a flour shaker. Try to put your hand in the bagger because my hand's quite mucky. But if you just get a little bit of spoon and just put a spoon of flour on your table rather than you putting your hand in the bag is a lot better because you make your flour go off then. So just, as I say, just bring it together. I didn't knead it like bread. If you knead it, your scones will be a bit of a tough texture. They won't be so crumbly and melt in the mouth texture. So just be gentle with it. Now, another mistake people make with scones, they roll them out. They get a rolling pin on it and they roll it out. And you'll get too thin. We don't want biscuits, we want scones. Just press it down like that. Brilliant. You might not have a rolling pin anyway, so you can make this because, you don't need it. Just press it down. You don't want to go too thin. That's about the thickness you want. Then cutters. If you haven't got cutters, you could use a glass to do it, or a jam jar, but don't use glasses like wine glasses because they're a bit too thin. You might break them. So then you have glass in your dough. That wouldn't be very nice, would it? You'd have to chuck it all away and start again. So cut it. Try and get as many out the first time as you can, because the more this dough is brought together and handled, as I said, the tougher it becomes. And then just when you've got it, you're just going to put them onto a tray. Over here, I've got a tray with some greaseproof paper on it. Could just be a grease tray or a non-stick tray. And then just cut them out. Just put on, so not too close together, so all that hot air distributes before them. Oh, I didn't also say about putting your oven on. I think it's in your recipe book though. I didn't put mine on because it's a bit noisy. 200 degrees Fahrenheit or gas mark 6 on your oven, and preheat it so it's ready for when those scones go in. So you almost sort of do that before you start making them, so the oven heats up. I'm going to cook mine later. There we go. That's one out. Now with this mixture, I'm going to bring it together now. So you might have a smaller cutter, you might make some smaller scones. Bring it together, but don't overwork it. Don't knead it too much. Just be gentle. You might need a tiny bit more flour. Don't go mad with the flour though, because this dries this out a bit. And when it's sort of smooth, then press it down again, and I'm going to get one more out onto the tray, and try and keep it temptation. Sometimes I've had students that go too thin. Now keep them the same for consistency, which means they look nice, but they also cook the same. So I think I'm going to get one more out of this one. Again, gentle with this dough, just gentle, and then cut that one out. Don't waste that little bit. Squash it up. That could be your little taster. I'll just shape that because it's too small for the cutter. I'm just going to shape that into a scone shape. I'll put that on my tray. Don't go too thin. I'll put that on my tray as well. So as I say, if you use a smaller cutter, you might make more than that. So now, you could put them in the oven like that, but if you want a nice golden brown topping to them, you can get a little bit of egg or milk and just paint the top. Don't let it run down the edge because it will stop them from rising up. It will seal that the sides too much. Just a little bit painted on top. And this is going to give them a nice golden brown colour when they go in the oven. And also what gives them a golden brown colour is the flour, because when you heat the starch, it dextrinises, and that's what's made these scones golden brown on top. The sugar also caramelizes, which also makes them golden brown. The flour is the structure in these cakes. They're like sort of building bricks of a scone. So the butter we said was for flavour and texture. The sugar, flavour obviously, and the fruit is added. It's made more scones, it's increased the volume, it's added extra fibre to it. And this is packed full of fibre and really good for you. And it extracts the sweetness as well. But you could put your own things. You could put a chopped apple in there, you could put some cherry and coconut in there, dried blueberries in there. Try to put chocolate chips in there though, because you've already seen how much sugar went in and fat, and also chocolate melts and oozes out. You don't need to have chocolate chips in it. Try and keep them traditional flavours. And when you have them, I mean, lots of people have them with cream and jam traditionally, cream tea, but even just a little bit, sliced in half, a little bit of butter inside. So they go in the oven for about 15 minutes, I say 200 degrees Celsius, gas mark 6, for 15 minutes. And you want them to be golden brown. And when you lift them up, they're also brown underneath as well. Now they still might be a little bit soft, and because they firm up when they come out. So it's golden brown all over, and when you turn them over, they're golden brown underneath as well. I'm sure somebody will help you with that. Then leave them to cool. They're nice to have them warm. They don't keep very well actually, because they haven't got a great deal of fat in them, and they're obviously homemade. Shop bought scones will keep longer. I doubt they'll last that long once you've made them, but they should be eaten on the day you make them, or you can freeze them and have them at a later date. So I look forward to seeing your wonderful pictures of your scones. Send them to me on Satchel 1. Have you adapted the recipe? Have you tried to do some sweet and savoury? Did you maybe save a bit of cheese and sprinkle a bit of cheese on top? The recipe also mentioned about putting seeds in as well. You might have sprinkle some seeds on top of your cheese scones, some sunflower or some pumpkin seeds on top of your scones. I look forward to seeing them. Bye for now, Year 7.